announcement today with 4 main points. First, today's Liberal electric vehicle announcement is yet another blow for the Canadian auto workers. For an auto worker, for example, in Brampton laid off after Stellantis Jeep Compass moved to Illinois recently, learning that up to $2.3 billion of Canadian taxpayer dollars will now subsidize the American auto industry is very cold comfort for those workers and their families. The Canadian auto manufacturing, our auto manufacturing sector makes more than 1 million vehicles annually, yet very few meet the requirements announced today, less than 5%, in fact, if you include, for example, Windsor's Stellantis plant producing the plug-in Pacifica minivan and EV Dodge Charger. Again, less than 5% of Canadian-made vehicles will benefit from this announcement, despite it being 2.3 billion Canadian taxpayer dollars. So as a result, American and other foreign-made EVs and plug-in hybrids will capture the benefits of this new subsidy. Despite the Liberals signing on, and I'll remind you of this, up to $52 billion to subsidize and create an EV supply chain in Canada, the vast majority of these vehicles produced again and sold domestically remain gas-powered in Canada. Today's policy will therefore benefit countries like the United States that manufacture far more EVs than Canadians drive. In fact, the rebate will now support American EV producers that relocated from Canada to the United States due to the U.S. tariffs, like the Jeep Compass, as I mentioned. Canadian taxpayers should not be forced to subsidize American-built vehicles that should have been produced in Canada, is really the bottom line today. Secondly, rather than scrapping the damaging EV mandate, the Liberals have effectively reintroduced it under a different framework. The new standards will pressure the Canadian manufacturers to produce 75% EVs by 2035, which is only a modest change from the previous 100% requirement under the original EV mandate. Conservatives have long warned that forcing 100% EV sales by 2035, while EVs still represent a minority of our market, was unrealistic and created prolonged uncertainty for manufacturers and workers making long-term investment decisions. For example, in Q3 of 2025, fewer than 10% of newly registered vehicles in Canada were zero emission. Delays in abandoning this original Liberal EV mandate left uncertainty and have really left the sector in limbo, and jobs were lost and confidence was eroded in the Canadian auto manufacturing sector. The Standing Committee on Industry and Technology heard clearly that the original mandate was impossible to meet and would have devastated the auto sector in Canada. The revised framework risks producing many of the same harms with limited benefit for Canadian workers and manufacturers. Third, instead of securing the trade agreement Canadians were promised by Prime Minister Carney by July 21st, 2025, to protect Canadian auto workers and other manufacturing jobs, the government is asking taxpayers today to subsidize foreign-made EVs. This announcement comes after 5,000 Canadian auto sector jobs have been lost, including, among others, 3,000 at Stellantis, 500 at GM's Oshawa plant, and 725 at Picard. And I will say that while the government's announcement for worker support programs is welcome, and however well-intentioned, it does not create new Canadian jobs, and it does not fix the underlying problem. Canada's auto legacy deserves policies that strengthen our domestic production. Today does not do that. Canada has, of course, as you know, a proud history, more than 100 years, in fact, of building world-class automobiles. We have some of the best workers in the world in the auto sector in Canada. It supports over 600 direct and indirect world-class jobs and contributes more than $16 billion to the national economy. Decisions affecting this sector must strengthen, not undermine, as today did, Canadian workers and domestic production. And lastly, while Conservatives welcome the end of the original EV mandate achieved through our sustained pressure and our effective official opposition, and were certainly validated by today's Liberal shift, serious concerns remain that the new policy will continue to harm Canada's auto industry while enriching the American sector using Canadian taxpayer dollars, even as the ongoing trade war continues to cost good Canadian manufacturing jobs.
As you point out, as by the Conservative Party to react to the announcement of today, could you explain your position in French, please? One of you, anyone.
We'd be happy to get you all the information today, fully bilingual.
None of you can do this right now.
Oui, aujourd'hui, c'est un gros problème pour tout le monde dans le secteur du Canada. C'est très bien pour Donald Trump et les auto workers des États-Unis. C'est excellent. Aujourd'hui, c'est excellent pour Donald Trump. Today is an excellent day, by the way, for Donald Trump, because the Canadian government just announced $2.3 billion in EV and plug-in hybrid subsidies that will go to enrich the American auto sector. Just to be very clear, today's an excellent day for Donald Trump.
You don't support the purchase incentives to encourage people to buy EVs?
I think it's difficult for us as parliamentarians to support something that sends up to 2.3 billion taxpayer dollars to the American auto sector. That's very difficult for us to support.
Toyota and Honda make cars in Ontario.
Absolutely.
Toyota and Honda, especially Toyota, makes plug-in hybrids. So is there a problem with that?
Again, there's a very small amount of cars in Canada that meet these requirements. There are some, we appreciate that, but the vast majority of these subsidies will go towards foreign-made plug-ins and EVs.
So imagine if you're an auto worker in Brampton who lost. Imagine if you're an auto worker in Brampton who lost their job because the production of the Jeep Compass EV went to the United States, right? That's what's happened. And the Jeep Compass EV is now going to be eligible for these rebates. So it's going to be built in the United States, shipped back into Canada, purchased by Canadians with subsidy from taxpayer dollars that those workers actually paid in their taxes. You ask yourself, why was this announcement not made at an auto production facility today? It wasn't, because it's not good news for manufacturing autos in Canada. As my colleague said, the vast majority of EVs bought in Canada are made in the United States. There are very few made here in Canada. In fact, over the entire lifespan of manufacturing EVs in Canada, we've manufactured 40,000, and we produce around 1.3 million vehicles a year. This is going to be another blow for Canadian auto workers. In addition to the 50,000 Chinese EVs that are coming in, this announcement is not for Canadian auto workers.
I'm just confused. You're assuming that Canadians would want to buy a Jeep Compass instead of buying a Toyota or a Honda product that's made in Ontario at this point.
We don't
your argument is based on that.
We don't
right?
produce enough of those, and I don't know how many of those vehicles are actually going to be eligible for this rebate because it's unclear. But what we do know is that the vast majority of EVs that are bought in Canada that are eligible for these things are made by American auto workers, not Canadian auto workers. And we're in a trade war. Donald Trump, but Donald Trump has put 10% tariffs on every single vehicle that we send to the United States. And in return, we're giving subsidies for the EVs that they produce to come into Canada. How is that elbows up? This is the exact opposite of elbows up, and it's going to hurt Canadian auto workers who have already lost 5,000 jobs.